By the time a thought has reached our mouth and travelled all the way through our synapses and pathways of our mind, the work that underpins that thought has actually been going on for some time. Shall I say that again? A little bit shorter, maybe. So by the time a thought has reached our mouth, the work that underpins that thought has actually been going on for some time. So when I say it like that, it doesn't sound like rocket science. I mean, duh, we've got our subconscious. But I think it's something that can be really useful to explore and to be aware of as well. So, for example, if we feel that we need to work on bravery, then by the time we come to do that work, we perhaps buy Brené Brown's books. We get hold of a copy of Feel the Fear and do it anyway. We listen to TED Talks and podcasts on courageousness, etc., etc. And that's all good. And it's the stuff that helps us consciously move forward. But the idea I want to explore or to propose is that by the time we come to do those things, the work, with a capital W, has already been gestating. So the foundational stuff that enables us to make all of those decisions, to buy, to read and listen to the wisdom of others, and to practice our own courageousness, that work has been going on for some time. So I find this idea immensely powerful and empowering. And I also find it deeply hopeful as well, because it says to me that we are already far further along the path than we may at first believe ourselves to be. Along the path of change, for example. And obviously that's one of the core threads to this podcast. So we don't need to feel hopeless and say, oh God, I'm not brave, I'm not courageous, and label ourselves in that way, identify in that way. Instead, we could reframe it and perhaps say, gosh, this is something that's coming up for me now. I'm clearly coming into a time when I'm being drawn to turn my attention toward how it could be to be more brave or more courageous. And we can acknowledge that inside us, on a subconscious level, that work has already been ongoing. And in that sort of process, we can then say to ourselves, well, how can I build on that work? What can I do to raise my conscious awareness of the thought processes that have been shifting for me, rather than getting lost and trapped in the thought processes of, oh, I can't, the brick wall that is built of the word can't. And instead we can say, oh, that's interesting. I see that I can because I already am. And I've seen this play out on so many occasions with clients coming to me and perhaps sharing that they find the concept of self-care so hard to access. It's very, very common. And then between us, we work together to help them see that just choosing to invest in themselves is an act of self-care. So by bringing themselves into the coaching relationship, or whatever it might be that they've chosen to do, it might not be a client, it might be a friend or a colleague, it might be an acquaintance, but by choosing to do some work, to seek some support. Just by doing that, that is an act of self-care. And I use that word investing very mindfully, actually, because that's really what we're doing when we, choose to sign up for a course, to do counselling, to do coaching. We are choosing to invest in ourselves. And that's not just financial, although clearly that is part of it, but it's also about investing our energy, investing our time, investing our attention in ourselves. By doing that, it's an act of self-care. So when clients come to me and they say, I can't care for myself, I don't know how to practice self-care, it's a really lovely process often for them to see that the act of having that conversation is an expression of the fact that on some level they are already being driven to care for themselves more fully. So I've had a little explore on the interweb, as you do, to see if this is a concept that others have written about, but I haven't yet found anything, though I really cannot believe I'm the only one to have thought this. So I'd love to know if you've come across anything on this before, and if yes, it'd be brilliant if you could share it with me. I'd really appreciate that. And equally, if you have kind of thoughts or reflections, or if it sparks anything for you, I'd love to hear from you, because this is very explorative thinking for me, even though it's something that I feel deep down in my belly to be true, because it feels so obvious to me that this is the case, and it may be obvious to you too, although as I'm saying this, of course, I might be the only one who didn't already always know this. So if that's the case, indulge me as I keep going on with this podcast episode and I keep exploring it. So my feeling is, my own sense is, that we get prompted by our inner voice, by our true self with a capital S, when we choose to begin the work, capital W, on ourselves. And I've seen so many markers of this when I look back along my own journey. So moments, for example, when others have prompted me or nudged me toward my own course. And, these moments, they might not always be immediately obvious. So, for example, there are 3 books that I've been given over the years. And none of these seem to be that significant at the time. But each of them have been a part of my path, like a breadcrumb trail that leads to the place I am today. And it was interesting, actually, as I was writing this episode and I was sort of exploring, like, how do I get this concept across in a way that hopefully is makes sense. These 3 books all just sort of landed in my head, like blomp into my head, if that's even a word. And it felt like, oh gosh, yes, they really were markers that, were part of sparking some of that inner subconscious work. And I was completely unaware of it at the time. So the first one was, one of my brothers gave me a copy of The Guide to the Advanced Soul when I first left home at 18. It's the most unlikely book for him to have given me. And me at 18, I'm not sure I was projecting, a person that was open to reading that, but gosh, it was so meaningful to me. It is full of quotes from Eileen Caddy, who was the founder of Findhorn in Scotland, the very, very famous spiritual retreat centre. And the connection to that book today is that Anton is now reading me one of her books before I go to sleep at night. I'm not sure if I think I've told you that he does that. It's a lockdown practice that we've continued, and I absolutely love it. So Eileen Caddy was deeply spiritual, and I find her writing soothing and inspiring. And that book I did open when he gave it to me, and it has sat with me all these years. 35 years later, I still have the copy very much to hand. The second book was about 15 years ago. A really dear friend gave me a copy of Conversations with God. And that book sat on my shelves unread until just 2 or 3 years ago, when it really helped me deepen my wakefulness, if you sort of mean. It helped me wake up even more fully and see things differently. And around the same time, so again, sort of 15, 16 years ago, another friend lent me her copy of The Artist's Way, which many years later gave me the confidence to write my second book, The Heart of Change. And in fact, there's actually a fourth occasion also involving a book. So 21 years ago, almost exactly, I met an ex-nun. Sounds like the beginning of a joke. I met an ex-nun at an airport in New York when we were both waiting for a storm to play out. And we spoke for hours. I just fell in love with her. And she gave me a book called The Courage to Teach. So I didn't read it at the time. But when I picked it up a couple of years ago, you can see there's a bit of a theme here, I saw there was so much there that mirrored my own thinking. And it had a foreword by Mark Nepo. And at that point, Anton had just started reading to me at night. It was during lockdown. And it was, of course, one of Mark Nepo's books that we'd randomly chosen. So it just felt like there was this sort of beautiful connecting thread. So for whatever reason, each of those people was inspired to pass those books on to me. At the time, my conscious self couldn't understand it or get it, and in fact wasn't even that interested in three of them. But it feels to me like each of those books has had a subliminal influence on me. It's almost like they've been waiting in the wings until I was ready. And they sparked thoughts all those years ago when those books were given to me that sat deeply and gestated and connected with other thoughts until they all converged at the point when I was ready to actively pursue the work. So the changes that I put into place have been bubbling away for some time. I just hadn't been consciously aware that they were there. And I think there are two things that come from this. I mean, there's probably lots and lots and lots of thoughts that come out of this, but right now I think there are two things that come from this. Firstly, I think this is where deepening our self-awareness is such a useful part of the process. So we can see these past occurrences and the threads that weave from them to the experiences that we have today. And secondly, it's really important not to try to rush things or push at stuff that's not yet ready to come into fruition. So we need to allow the process to unfurl, this process of gestation. We need to allow things to unfurl like a fern, revealing its beauty in its own time. If you try and unwind the fern, you're just going to damage it. It's never going to grow into the beautiful, enormous fern that it would be if left to its own natural process. So there is this balance here between being aware that stuff is going on in our subconscious, seeing where the connecting threads might be, but not trying to push at it, not trying to force things to come through, because actually with force just comes tension. So, like I said before, this is a nascent thought and it needs some refining, percolation, reflection. It's something I've noticed. I've been kind of talking about a bit with like friends and Anton. He gets to hear all of this. Um, but at its heart lies this very strong sense that when we think we're beginning the work had in truth already begun, or has in truth already begun. And when we feel we're up against things, or that the path feels too long, or that we're not strong, or that we'll never move forward, we can remind ourselves, I can because I already am. That phrase feels so significant to me. It feels, as I say it, it feels like it's like deep resonance, deep, deep, deep in my belly. I can because I already am. This stuff, this change, these shifts in consciousness, shifts in awareness, shifts in behavior, beliefs, attitudes. That stuff, if you're having conscious thoughts about it, that shift began a while ago. On a subconscious or on a soul level, if you prefer that language, that stuff has been going on. And so we can remind ourselves with like a joyful heart. Even it doesn't mean to say this stuff is always easy, but with a joyful heart, we can say, I can because I already am. And it's a really lovely exercise as well, actually, to look back and see what are the positive influences that are the markers on your own breadcrumb trail to where you are today. So, the work has already begun. That's really the headline, and it's obviously the title for this episode too. I hope, as ever, that you found something resonant within it, and genuinely, if you come across anyone else talking about this, I'd really love to hear some other thoughts. I have a sense that there is some neurological base to this, and I really wouldn't be surprised if some very wise neuroscientist has been exploring it already. Gosh, wouldn't that be exciting? Anyway, I am so grateful to you for being here, as always. And if you're not already a member of the mailing list, then please do come along and join us. And it's very simple. Just email me, actually, henny@hennyflynn.co.uk, and I'll make sure you get added to the list. And there's some exciting stuff coming up soon, which I'll share maybe in the next episode. We'll see if I'm ready to share it then. But some things that have been, to use that word I've been using quite a lot today, gestating. All right, my darlings, take care, and I send you a hug and a wave.